The divorce papers sat in my briefcase like a lead weight, unsigned but ready. 23 years of marriage, and it had come down to this, a stack of legal documents that would sever everything we'd built together. I'd made my decision 3 weeks ago, sitting alone in my downtown office after another silent dinner, another evening of existing in parallel universes under the same roof. I was a CEO of a mid-sized tech firm, accustomed to making difficult decisions. I'd laid off employees, shut down divisions, navigated hostile takeovers. But this decision had hollowed me out from the inside. Still, what choice did I have? My wife and I had become strangers. We spoke in logistical updates about bills and schedules. We slept on opposite sides of the bed, careful not to touch. The warmth had drained from our marriage so gradually that I couldn't pinpoint when we'd lost it. That Thursday afternoon, I left work early to meet with my attorney one final time before presenting the papers. The meeting ended quickly, everything was in order. I had 2 hours before I needed to head home, so I drove aimlessly through the city, my mind churning with rehearsed speeches and imagined scenarios. I found myself parking near Riverside Cafe, a small coffee shop in the arts district that my wife had mentioned once or twice. I needed caffeine and a quiet place to gather my thoughts before the conversation that would end my marriage. The cafe was exactly as I'd imagined, exposed brick, mismatched furniture, the smell of fresh espresso mixing with the sweet scent of pastries. I ordered a black coffee and found a corner table partially hidden behind a bookshelf. I pulled out my laptop, intending to review some contracts, but the words blurred together. My mind kept drifting to the envelope in my briefcase. Then I heard her laugh. It was unmistakable, that particular melody I'd fallen in love with decades ago but hadn't heard in months, maybe years. My wife was here, sitting with 3 women at a table near the window. I could see her profile through a gap in the bookshelf. My first instinct was to leave, but something kept me frozen in place. "Honestly, I don't know how you tolerate him," one of the women said, loud enough that I could hear clearly. I recognized her voice, Patricia, from my wife's book club. "He's so cold, so mechanical. Does he ever show any emotion?" My chest tightened. I should have left then, should have walked out before hearing more. But I remained still, hidden, listening to my wife's friends dissect our marriage and my personality. "Last month at the gallery opening, he barely spoke to anyone," another voice chimed in. "He just stood there looking uncomfortable. It was embarrassing. And that dinner party at the Hendersons," Patricia continued. "He left after an hour. An hour. Didn't even try to socialize. I mean, you're practically a single woman at these events." I gripped my coffee cup so hard I thought it might shatter. Every word confirmed what I'd suspected. I was the problem. I was the defective component in our marriage. I'd failed at being the husband she deserved, the social partner her friends expected. "That's enough." My wife's voice cut through the chatter, sharp and firm in a way I hadn't heard her speak in years. "We're just trying to help," Patricia said, her tone dripping with false concern. "You deserve better than." I said that's enough. My wife's voice was steel now. "You don't know what you're talking about. Any of you." The cafe seemed to hold its breath. I leaned closer to the gap in the bookshelf, my heart pounding. What happened next would change everything I thought I knew about my marriage. "He's not cold," my wife continued, her voice shaking slightly. "He's exhausted." My wife's words hung in the air like a challenge. Through the gap in the bookshelf, I watched her set down her teacup with deliberate precision, the kind of movement that preceded something important. "You want to know why he left the Henderson party after an hour?" she continued, her voice gaining strength. "Because he'd worked 18 hours that day. He came home at 7, showered, put on a suit, and drove us across town to that party because he knew I wanted to go. He's been running on 4 hours of sleep for 3 months because they're in the middle of a merger that could save 200 jobs. "Well, that's his choice," Patricia started, but my wife cut her off. "No, let me finish. You've spent the last 20 minutes picking apart my husband, and I've sat here listening, and I'm done. I'm done with all of it." I felt something crack open in my chest, surprise, confusion, maybe the first spark of hope I'd felt in months. This didn't sound like a woman trapped in a loveless marriage. This sounded like someone defending something precious. He doesn't socialize at your parties because he's an introvert who spends his entire day managing people and making decisions that affect their livelihoods, my wife said. By the time he gets to your gallery openings and dinner parties, he's completely drained. But he comes anyway. He always comes, because I ask him to. Because he knows it matters to me. If it's so exhausting for him, maybe he should say no, the third woman suggested, her name escaping me. If he really loved you, he'd make the effort. My wife laughed, but it was bitter. If he really loved me, do you know what he did last Tuesday? He rearranged his entire morning, meetings with the board, a call with investors, because I mentioned I was worried about the weird noise my car was making. He took it to the mechanic himself, waited there for 2 hours, then had his assistant drive him to a client meeting 30 minutes away because he knew I needed my car that day. I remembered that morning. She'd mentioned the noise at breakfast, one of our rare actual conversations. I'd simply taken her keys and handled it. It hadn't seemed like a grand gesture, just something that needed doing. That's basic consideration, Patricia said dismissively. That's not love, that's just. He leaves notes, my wife interrupted, her voice softer now. In my books. Little sticky notes with observations about passages he thinks I'd like, or pointing out contradictions in an author's argument because he knows I love debating ideas. He reads the books I read, dense philosophy and literary criticism, even though he's exhausted, even though he'd rather be reading his historical biographies. He does it so we have something to talk about. I'd forgotten about those notes. I'd started leaving them years ago, when our conversations had begun to shrink. I'd thought they went unnoticed, just one more attempt to bridge a widening gap. Last month, you asked why he seems distant, my wife continued. You want to know why? Because every time we go to one of your events, one of you makes a comment. About his clothes, too formal, too boring. About his career, too demanding, too consuming. About his personality, too quiet, too serious. You've spent 3 years making little cuts, and I've watched him bleed out slowly, trying to be someone he's not to fit into a social circle he never asked to join. The silence that followed was deafening. I sat frozen behind the bookshelf, my coffee long cold, my entire understanding of our marriage shifting beneath me like tectonic plates. That's not fair, Patricia protested weakly. We were just trying to help you see. See what? That I married the wrong man? That I should want someone more charismatic, more social, more entertaining? My wife's voice cracked slightly. I fell in love with him because he's genuine. Because when he speaks, it means something. Because he shows love through actions, not words. Because he's loyal and steady and brilliant in ways that none of you have ever bothered to see. I pressed my hand against my mouth, afraid any sound might escape. The divorce papers in my briefcase suddenly felt like an obscenity, a profound misunderstanding of everything that mattered. If you can't respect my husband, my wife said quietly, then I don't think we can be friends anymore. The shock on Patricia's face mirrored what I felt. You can't be serious, she said. We've been friends for 5 years. We're just looking out for you. No, my wife said firmly. You've been looking down on him. There's a difference. She reached for her purse, and I noticed her hands were shaking slightly. I've made excuses for it because I didn't want to lose this friend group. I didn't want to admit that the people I'd chosen to spend time with were slowly poisoning how I saw my own marriage. Poisoning. The third woman, I suddenly remembered her name was Diane, sounded offended. That's dramatic. We just think you could have more fun, be less tied down to someone so. So what? My wife challenged. So serious? So dedicated to his work? So uncomfortable with superficial socializing? She stood up, slinging her purse over her shoulder. My husband works 60-hour weeks to build something meaningful. He provides a life that lets me teach part-time and pursue my graduate degree. He never once complained when I decided to go back to school at 43, never once suggested it was impractical or self-indulgent. I'd forgotten she'd had those worries. When she'd first mentioned wanting to pursue her PhD in literature, she'd been tentative, apologetic about the time and money it would require. I'd simply asked her what she was waiting for. Of course she should do it. It was her dream. You make it sound like we're monsters, Patricia said, her voice hardening. We're trying to get you to see that you've become invisible in your own marriage. When's the last time he took you somewhere nice? When's the last time you two actually talked about something other than schedules? We talk every Sunday morning, my wife said quietly. We have coffee on the back porch, and we talk about the books we're reading, about ideas and philosophy and what matters. We've been doing it for 15 years. You wouldn't know that because it's private. Because it's ours. Sunday mornings. I realized with a start that those conversations were the only thing keeping me tethered to hope. They'd become so routine I'd almost stopped noticing them, but they were the one time each week when we weren't just coordinating logistics. We were actually connecting. Then why do you seem so unhappy? Diane asked, and there was genuine confusion in her voice. Every time we see you, you seem stressed, tired, distant. You thought my husband was making me miserable, my wife finished. But the truth is, I've been making myself miserable trying to maintain friendships with people who fundamentally don't respect the person I chose to spend my life with. She took a breath. I've been planning to tell you this for weeks. I'm done with the book club. I'm done with the gallery openings and the dinner parties and the constant socializing that leaves me exhausted and empty. My heart was racing now. She'd been planning to leave them, not me. While I'd been drafting divorce papers, she'd been preparing to extract herself from the very social obligations I'd assumed she cherished. You're going to isolate yourself, Patricia warned. You'll end up alone with a man who barely speaks to you, who can't give you what you need emotionally. He gives me everything I need, my wife said, her voice breaking slightly. The problem is that I've been too drained from performing for all of you to show him that. I've been coming home from these lunches and parties feeling criticized and judged, and I've taken that energy, or lack of it, back to my marriage. I've been distant and cold, and he's been trying to figure out what he did wrong, which makes him more withdrawn, which you interpret as him being emotionally unavailable, and the cycle continues. She understood. She'd seen the pattern, analyzed it, recognized how external forces had infiltrated our private space. While I'd been blaming myself for failing, she'd been diagnosing the real disease. This is a mistake, Patricia said, standing up now too. You're going to regret choosing him over us. I'm not choosing him over you, my wife replied calmly. I'm choosing my marriage over friendships that were damaging it. I'm choosing authenticity over performance. I'm choosing to spend my limited social energy on people who actually appreciate both of us. Patricia grabbed her coat with sharp movements. Fine. But don't come crying to us when you're bored and lonely in your quiet little life. I won't be, my wife said. I never was before I met you. Goodbye, Patricia. I watched through the gap as two of the women left in a huff, their departures theatrical and pointed. But Diane lingered, looking uncertain. I'm sorry, Diane said finally. I didn't realize. I thought we were helping. My wife's expression softened slightly. I know. But intention doesn't erase impact. After Diane left, more subdued than the others, my wife sat back down heavily. Through the bookshelf gap, I watched her cover her face with her hands. Her shoulders shook once, twice, and I realized she was crying. Not the dramatic sobbing of someone seeking attention, but the quiet, exhausted tears of someone who'd been holding too much for too long. I should have gone to her then. But I remained frozen, processing everything I'd heard, recalibrating years of assumptions. The divorce papers in my briefcase felt like evidence of my own blindness. How had I missed this? How had I been so focused on my own inadequacy that I'd failed to see her struggling? After a few minutes, my wife composed herself, wiped her eyes, and pulled out her phone. I watched her type something, then set the phone down and stare out the window. She looked exhausted but also lighter somehow, like she'd set down a heavy burden. My own phone buzzed. A text from her, working late tonight. Don't wait up. The message was typical of our recent communications. Brief, logistical, emotionless. But now I understood it differently. She wasn't avoiding me. She was protecting me from seeing her this raw, this depleted. She was trying to pull herself together before coming home. I made a decision then. I stood up, smoothed my suit jacket, and walked around the bookshelf to her table. She looked up, startled, as I pulled out the chair across from her. Recognition flashed across her face, followed quickly by shock, then horror as she realized how much I might have overheard. "How long have you been here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Long enough," I said. I'd spent decades making calculated business decisions, delivering difficult news with practiced composure. But sitting across from my wife in this cafe, I found myself stripped of all that professional polish. Long enough to hear you defend me. Long enough to realize I was about to make the worst decision of my life. Her eyes widened. "What do you mean?" I pulled the envelope from my briefcase and placed it on the table between us. I didn't open it, didn't explain what was inside. Just let it sit there like the confession it was. She stared at the envelope, then at me. Understanding dawned slowly. "No," she whispered. "Were you going to?" "I thought you were unhappy," I said, surprised by how steady my voice remained. "I thought I was failing you. Every event we attended, I could see the disappointment in your eyes. Every conversation that fizzled out after 2 sentences. Every night we spent in the same house but different worlds. I thought the kindest thing I could do was set you free." "Free?" She looked stricken. "I never wanted to be free from you. I wanted to be free from them." She gestured toward where her former friends had been sitting. From the constant performance, the judgment, the exhaustion of maintaining friendships that were slowly convincing me that my marriage was broken when it wasn't. "But we barely talk anymore," I said. "We barely touch. We're roommates who happen to share a mortgage. We're 2 exhausted people who forgot how to protect their marriage from outside interference," she countered. She reached across the table, hesitated, then placed her hand over mine. It was the first time she'd voluntarily touched me in months. "I'm so tired. Not of you. Not of us. Of everything else." I turned my hand over, lacing my fingers through hers. "I'm exhausted too. The merger, the politics, the constant decisions. I come home with nothing left to give, and then you seem to need me to be social and charming, and I couldn't. I failed you." "You never failed me," she said fiercely. "I failed us. I let those friendships take priority. I let their opinions creep into my head. I started seeing you through their eyes instead of my own, and I forgot why I fell in love with you in the first place." We sat in silence for a moment, hands clasped across the table, years of misunderstanding slowly unraveling. "What happened to us?" I asked finally. "We used to be solid. We used to be a team." "Emotional burnout," she said softly. "Both of us. We've been running on empty for so long that we forgot we were supposed to be each other's source of energy, not another drain on our resources." She was right. I'd been so focused on work, on providing, on solving problems, that I'd stopped seeing my marriage as something that needed active tending. And she'd been so caught up in maintaining social connections that she'd exhausted herself trying to bridge 2 incompatible worlds. "I don't want a divorce," I said, stating what now seemed obvious. "I want my wife back. I want Sunday mornings and book notes and someone who understands that silence isn't always emptiness." "I don't want a divorce either," she said, squeezing my hand. "I want to remember how to be us again. Without the interference. Without the performance. Just us." I picked up the envelope and, without opening it, tore it in half. Then in half again. The pieces fell onto the table between us like the debris of a disaster averted. "Where do we start?" I asked. My wife looked at the torn pieces of the envelope, then back at me. A small smile, the first genuine one I'd seen from her in months, touched her lips. "We start by going home," she said. "We start by admitting we've both been so busy surviving that we forgot to actually live our marriage." We left the cafe together, and I felt the strangeness of walking beside her, our hands still clasped. It was a simple gesture we'd abandoned somewhere along the way, deemed too complicated to navigate when both of us were juggling bags and phones and the mental load of our separate responsibilities. In the car, the silence between us felt different than it had in months, not empty but full of possibility. She broke it first. "I need to tell you something," she said, looking straight ahead through the windshield. "After I finish this semester, I'm taking a break from the PhD program." My first instinct was to protest. She'd worked so hard, was so close to finishing. But I caught myself. "Why?" "Because I'm drowning," she admitted. "Teaching part-time, coursework, dissertation research, and trying to maintain some semblance of a social life. I've been stretched so thin that I'm no use to anyone, especially not to you. I need to step back and remember what actually matters." "Your degree matters," I said carefully. "Your work matters." "Yes, but not more than my life matters. Not more than we matter." She turned to look at me. I've been so afraid of seeming like I'd given up, like I'd sacrificed my ambitions for marriage, that I kept pushing forward even when it was destroying me. And destroying us. I pulled into our driveway, a house we'd lived in for 12 years, but that had stopped feeling like a home somewhere along the way. We sat there for a moment before I spoke. "I'm going to delegate more at work," I said. "I've been afraid that if I'm not personally managing every detail, everything will fall apart. But I've built a strong team. I need to trust them. I need to stop wearing exhaustion like a badge of honor." "We've both been martyring ourselves," she observed. "Sacrificing our marriage on the altar of productivity and achievement and social acceptance." We went inside together, and the house felt different, or maybe we felt different in it. We ended up in the kitchen, and I did something I hadn't done in over a year. I cooked. Nothing elaborate, just pasta and the simple marinara sauce I'd made regularly in our early years together. She sat at the counter, watching, and we talked. Really talked. She told me about her dissertation struggles, about how her advisor had been subtly dismissive, how the academic politics were more draining than the actual work. I told her about the merger, about the nights I lay awake running worst-case scenarios, about the guilt I felt when I had to make decisions that would disrupt people's lives. "Why didn't we talk about this before?" she asked. "Because talking required energy neither of us had," I said. "And because somewhere along the way, we started protecting each other from our problems instead of sharing them. We became too independent," she agreed. "We stopped being partners and became two people living parallel lives, occasionally intersecting for logistics." Over dinner at our kitchen table, not in front of the TV, not with phones in hand, just us, we made plans. Not grand resolutions that would last a week, but small, sustainable changes. Sunday mornings would stay sacred. No phones, no external obligations. Just coffee and conversation. We'd institute a weekly check-in, 15 minutes where we talked about how we were actually doing, not just what we needed to accomplish. She'd leave the PhD program on a formal pause, with the option to return when life had more bandwidth. No shame, no defeat, just a strategic retreat. I'd block out 2 evenings a week where I'd be home by 6, no exceptions unless truly critical. My team could handle emergencies. We'd stop accepting social invitations out of obligation. If it wasn't genuinely fulfilling for both of us, we'd decline. "What about friends?" she asked. "I just burned those bridges pretty thoroughly." "You'll make new ones," I said. "Or reconnect with old ones. Or maybe we'll discover we're enough for each other, at least for now." "That's what they'd say is unhealthy," she pointed out. "That we're isolating ourselves." "Let them say it," I replied. "We're not isolating. We're being selective. We're protecting what matters instead of performing for people who don't actually care about us." That night, we broke another pattern. Instead of retreating to opposite sides of the bed, we ended up in the middle, talking in the dark like we used to when we first bought this house. She told me she'd missed me, even though I'd been right there the whole time. I told her I'd been so convinced I was failing her that I'd stopped trying, which only made things worse. "I heard what you said," I told her. "About me not being cold, just exhausted. About showing love through actions instead of words. Did you mean that?" "Every word," she said. "You've been showing me you love me every single day. I just stopped recognizing the language." "I need to say it more," I admitted. "The actual words. I love you. I've been assuming you knew, but assumptions are how we ended up here. I love you too, she whispered. I never stopped. I just forgot how to show it in ways you could receive. The next morning was Saturday, and we did something radical. Nothing. We stayed in bed late, made breakfast together, and spent the afternoon on the back porch with our books. She was reading a collection of essays on contemporary philosophy. I had a biography of Ulysses S. Grant. Every so often, one of us would share an interesting passage, and we'd discuss it. Small moments of intellectual intimacy that reminded us why we'd worked in the first place. On Sunday, during our coffee ritual, she asked me what I'd been planning to say when I gave her the divorce papers. I'd rehearsed this whole speech, I admitted, about how you deserved someone more capable of giving you the life you wanted. Someone more social, more emotionally available, more everything I'm not. Thank God you overheard that conversation, she said. Though I wish you hadn't had to. I wish I'd stood up to them sooner. I wish I'd protected us better. We both failed at that, I said. We let outside forces define our marriage instead of defining it ourselves. So we take it back, she said simply. We decide what our marriage looks like, what success means for us, what we need from each other. Not what anyone else thinks we should want. Months later, I can see how close we came to the edge. The divorce papers, now just confetti in our recycling bin, could have ended everything. Instead, that overheard conversation saved us. But it wasn't just the conversation. It was finally recognizing that our marriage wasn't broken. We were just burned out from trying to be people we weren't, for audiences who didn't matter. My wife did take that break from her PhD program. She's using the time to figure out if she actually wants to finish it, or if it was always more about proving something than pursuing genuine passion. I restructured my role at work, promoted 2 senior managers, and reclaimed my evenings. The merger closed successfully without me micromanaging every detail. We're not perfect now. We still have hard days, moments of disconnect, times when exhaustion threatens to pull us back into old patterns. But now we recognize the warning signs. We talk about it. We course correct together. And those toxic friends? My wife never heard from Patricia again. Diane reached out a few weeks later with a genuine apology, and they've had coffee once or twice, but on new terms, with clear boundaries. My wife has been slowly building a smaller, more authentic social circle of people who appreciate both of us. Last week, she left a note in my biography. Thank you for staying. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being exactly who you are. I wrote back in her philosophy collection, thank you for defending us. Thank you for choosing us. I'd choose you again, every time. We're rebuilding something that almost crumbled, not into what it was, but into something stronger. Something that can weather not just the storms from outside, but the slow erosion of neglect and misunderstanding. Something built on honesty instead of assumption, on active choice instead of passive drift. I almost walked out on my wife. Instead, I walked back into our marriage, into partnership, into the messy, imperfect, beautiful work of loving someone through exhaustion and burnout and all the small deaths a marriage endures. And every Sunday morning, over coffee on our back porch, I remember why that work is worth doing.